welcome back to the Ron Reviews podcast. This is episode 4, and since it's October, I'd like all of my videos this month to be related to Halloween in some way, and this is the perfect new comic to talk about since it has vampires in it. I'm talking about Nightclub by Mark Millar. This is a great little series that just wrapped up this year, and the premise is simple but awesome. A kid becomes a vampire, and instead of acting like a monster from a horror movie, he decides to become a superhero. That's one of those ideas where you think, why didn't anyone else think of this before? It's also notable for being $1.99 in an era where most single issues are usually around $4.99, so that was a pretty ballsy move. I'm just going to go over all 6 issues individually, since it's a podcast, and basically just tell you what I thought about everything. The main thing that I like about this first issue is it doesn't have a really drawn out beginning. I feel like other writers would have had Danny, the main character, get bitten at the very end of the issue, but Mark Millar is really good at keeping the reader invested. It's very fast paced. He falls off his bike, he breaks his neck, he's in the hospital, and then a vampire bites him in the first couple of pages. So yeah, the 3 main players in this are Danny Garcia, the main kid, and then his 2 friends, Amy and Sam. And I feel like Mark Millar made this as a young adult comic, but it doesn't go too far that way. It's somewhere in the middle because it still has a lot of cursing and violence in it. But anyway, when Danny is in the hospital and gets bitten, he's taken away by this guy named Nick Lascaris. And I really like the design of his character. It's a nice mix between old school Victorian vampire and some modern street clothes. It's worth noting that Brendan McCarthy did a lot of the design work for these new books that Mark Millar has been putting out. And if you don't know him, he designed a lot of the look and also did the storyboards for Mad Max Fury Road, as well as a bunch of other things. He's a legendary comic book creator as well. Did a lot of work for 2000 AD and Judge Dredd. That's where I initially knew him from. So it's cool that he's working with Mark Millar because that's just like a really good team to have for these new books. Speaking of it being sort of like a young adult teen drama, there are a lot of elements like bullies, for example. The one character, Sam, has his own bully that gets introduced in this first issue. So we know there's probably going to be some sort of payoff to that in the end. But yeah, as well as being a vampire horror type book, it's also a superhero book first and foremost. So we get that scene where this guy, Nick Lascaris, is teaching Danny how to use all of his vampire powers. So you get all that vampire mythology peppered in here, which is really cool. And then it's also mixed with something like the scene in the first Spider-Man movie where Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker is testing out his powers and seeing what he could do. So it is a really cool blend of concepts. So yeah, the ending of this issue is really great because Danny surprises his friends with not only being alive and well, but he's also in his new superhero costume, which is really cool because it does have that Spider-Man look to it, but he's wearing just a wrestling mask that he probably ordered from Amazon. So it was a really good ending to the first issue. The art is done by Juanan Ramirez, and I've never heard of him before, but he's definitely perfect for this book. And like I was saying, it does have that Spider-Man feel to it. And I think that might be why Mark Millar chose him for this project. So it all works, and it does what all good first issues do. It makes you want to read the next one. This issue also sets up the main characters being social media obsessed, which makes sense. In issue 2, Danny convinces his friends to become vampires as well. And this issue is really the testing of the powers issue. There's also a very satisfying scene at the end where Sam gets back at his bully. But overall, it's more of a calm before the storm situation. because we don't even know who the bad guys are yet at this point in the story. There is a nice escalation going into issue 3 because our main characters are trying out their new powers and then putting them to the test against criminals. And it also has this real world feel to it because they're not just doing this stuff out of the kindness of their hearts. They want to monetize their heroism, basically. I thought their superhero names they came up with were pretty funny. So you have Thundercloud, who is Sam, and then Yellowbird is Amy, and Starguard is Danny. And they're obviously goofy names to drive home that these are just teenagers messing around on YouTube. And this issue is also where we get a little love triangle going on because Sam obviously likes Amy, but she likes Danny. So there's going to be some problems if there's a volume 2 of this. I also like the scene where they have to get beat up at the party to protect their secret identities. But yeah, this series uses the vampire mythology in interesting ways. The bad guys finally show up at the end of this issue and move into a perfect haunted looking house. And they're a group of older vampires with this big biker guy named Gunner John as their leader. And this really does a good job establishing them as horrible monsters. The creepiest one is this old lady named Bloody Mary. And the sort of twist at the end is Nick Lascaris is with them. So he's been working with them all this time. Or is he undercover? Just to back up a little bit, in issue 3, when Danny and his friends are trying to take down these neo-Nazi guys in a apartment building, the whole thing blows up. So this whole issue is really dealing with the repercussions of that. And this series does a good job putting these kids in danger, even though they have all of these vampire abilities now, because they can't go out into the sunlight. They're being taken away by paramedics. Danny ends up trapped in a morgue and he can't even eat the dead people in there because their blood isn't fresh. So it's just a really good way of making this tense even though they basically can't die. So I thought that was just a clever place to put him in because it must be hard thinking of ways to really hurt vampires because they're usually the bad guys in the story that are invulnerable for the most part until the good guys can figure out a way to stop them. But this is a perfect place for Nick Lascaris to come back into the story and save Danny. And he's also pissed off because they were kind of doing this superhero stuff behind his back before he could even get a chance to, set up his team that he wants to build. So out of all of these issues, issue 5 is by far the most disturbing, and it's also the best because we get a full backstory for Nick Lascaris, who to me is the best character of this book. He was an undercover cop who runs into Gunner John and his gang, and they eventually turn him, and he joins their crew. They're kind of like the group of vampires in that movie Near Dark, and I wonder if this was inspired by that a little bit. The part that really makes you hate this group the most is when they go into a pool at like a SeaWorld type place with the killer whales and they end up feasting on them. And it's just so shocking the way it's laid out in the comic and unsettling. And the way Mark Millar writes it, again, it just really makes you hate these people. So now the plan is for Lascaris to train the nightclub to take down Gunner and his group. But it's a Mark Millar book, so I feel like he has a habit of killing off my favorite characters out of nowhere in most of his stories. The other one that comes to mind is Skyfox in Jupiter's Legacy. And it's just when you're starting to really like a character or get into them and you want them to continue on, boom, they get killed. But I get that it is supposed to make things feel hopeless and really ramp up the stakes. And I guess if this is a vampire Spider-Man type story, then he's kind of the Uncle Ben stand-in a way for Danny. And then it gets even crazier when Gunner John decides not to kill the nightclub group, and he tells them that they have to go home and kill their families sort of as an initiation to join their group. And if they don't, then obviously Gunner John and his group are going to go in and kill them themselves. So that's a really crazy spot to put everybody in for issue 6. And issue 6 was a double-sized finale, which was great. And I think this is the point in the story where they're not just doing things to make money and monetize their vampire abilities. Now they have to become heroes, and they decide that they're going to take the fight right to Gunnar John and his gang instead of waiting around for them to show up and kill their families. There's also a really interesting little part in this issue with one of the younger vampires in Gunnar John's group called Sean, and he's on his phone gang stalking a celebrity. And this is a little commentary on cancel culture, and I feel like Mark Millar is the only comic book writer with the balls to lay it out like this, and I've always really felt the same way about it. Whether the person did anything truly bad or not, I always thought it was weird how the people doing the canceling on Twitter, they almost have like pleasure in taking people down, and they all gang up on the person. And I don't know, the whole thing just felt ugly to me when it first started on Twitter and just on the internet in general. And it's really funny how well it fits in with having a despicable vampire guy like this doing stuff like that in the book. And Mark Millar's been adding things like that in his new books lately, like The Ambassadors and even Big Game a little bit. And honestly, it's really refreshing because any other comic book writer would be scared to talk about this type of stuff in a bad light. So really, I think Mark Millar's unique in that way. But yeah, most of this issue is just a huge fight between Gunnar John and the nightclub. Well, mostly Danny. And it was really satisfying. I really liked the way it was all put together. The art was great throughout the whole series. And I really think this is a good version of a young adult book. And I really think it could be a great show too. And I have no doubt that Mark Millar is going to make it a show on Netflix since he has that deal. And it sets up some really good dramatic moments when this is all said and done and Gunnar John and his gang die. Danny and Amy start to like each other, which obviously makes Sam jealous. And at the end, he finds his bully and asks him if he wants to join his gang, which kind of sets him up to be the villain of the next volume, which is even more interesting than someone like Gunnar John because they have a relationship. And that would also work great for the end of the first season of the Netflix show, too. I also think Sam could be played by that kid that played, well, he's probably not a kid anymore. The guy who played Peter Parker's friend from the new Spider-Man movies, I think he would be perfect for that role. So yeah, this was a really entertaining 6 issues. I hope it continues because I think you could do a lot with this premise. So yeah, the trade paperback is out now, so you could pick that up. And then you could also go to a local comic book shop and they might have some of the back issues left. But yeah, it's pretty simple to just get this on Amazon if you want a really cool vampire story and also a really fun superhero story at the same time. And it's perfect for October. It's Halloween season, so you can't really go wrong with any of these new Mark Millar titles that have come out in the past year. All right, well, that's it for me for this episode of the Ron Reviews podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. It really helps me out. And I'll be back next time with episode 5. Take care. Hey everyone, it's Ron here with a quick announcement. When I started this channel, I was reading and reviewing the Dune books and other sci-fi related material. And most of you might not know that I'm also a musician. So when I was reading these sci-fi books, I started to get inspired and decided to make my own soundtrack to use for my videos, and now I'm excited to tell you all about the first volume in the Ron Reviews original soundtrack collection. This album includes the first 17 tracks featured on my channel, and it's available now exclusively on Bandcamp. Be sure to check the description of this video for the link to the album. Thanks so much for the support so far. I know I'm just starting out, but I hope you're having as much fun as I am. So check out the original soundtrack Volume 1 on Bandcamp. This music is great if you want something moody and atmospheric to listen to while you're reading some science fiction. I think you're going to love it. Thanks.